Hello, I'd like to give you a deeper look into the Python interface for the CS1 game engine and the CS1 IDE to reveal some of the true power that exists here. It's not just a little uh, toy integration. You can fully flesh out applications with this interface. Now, currently, the only interface that's being defined is a client-side interface that will be running in the client. In other words, the user's browser, whenever they go to the application, that's where this Python code will be running. Okay, and it's being interpreted, and it's going to be converted into JavaScript behind the scenes. But for right now, let's just look at some code and see how we can do some more powerful things in the Python language using the CS1 game engine and the CS1 IDE. So if you're not familiar with the CS1 IDE, what we have here in the top right is the code editor. Over here to the left, we have basically a lesson, which is a Google Slides presentation. This is an IDE designed especially for teachers to use to teach students about programming and game development and even game art and so forth. And I'm designing it so that it can work with several languages. Of course, JavaScript, which is the underlying architecture, is written in JavaScript. However, we have the Python language now getting incorporated. And in the future, I will build in a Java interface as well. The Java interface will only be a server-side microservice interface. So it will be different for reasons that will become obvious when we discuss that in the future. But for right now, I'll just show you the kind of like layout here. This is the, if you will, the Google Slides presentation that will have the whatever the lesson is, and then you can go through the various slides of the lesson, and then the students can click the checkbar or checkbox right there, and they can do a formative assessment as many times as necessary till they kind of demonstrate to themselves that they understand the information. And then they can proceed to do the activity that's at the end of the lesson that deals with coding, saving their code, and launching the game. In the case of Python, I've actually removed the necessity for running a build step on it, so it's a faster iterative process. So literally you just have to edit what's in here in the code editor and then click the little save icon that will highlight whenever you make a change. And then you can launch the game. So let's take a look at this code. Let's look at what it does, and then we'll talk about why it does what it does. So let's go ahead and just launch the game right now. Here we are. I'll turn that down a little bit.
Welcome to CS1 Community Park. Please join us at 9 p.m. for some tasty roasted marshmallow s'mores.
So you can see that there is this square plane that's over in this 3D world, and that's basically just a logging area so that we can log all kind of output and keep track of whatever we want to keep track of in a very efficient way to log it visually. Over here we see a box or a cube, if you will, that was added to the world using Python, and it's actually being controlled by a component that was created in Python as well. So that animation was basically defined in the Python code that we're going to be looking at as well. This right here where it says a box, that's the tag name for the element that represents this particular box in the HTML markup. And I was just printing that out, so you'll be able to see in the code where I printed that out. Now, the world can be whatever you want it to be. You can design your own worlds and make a full blast game out of it, totally. This is a multiplayer game out of the box. I don't reveal how to add the other players at the very beginning. I usually use that as an incentive to get the students kind of through the first few units, and then we go into adding the other players. But I find that they ask other students that had me in the past that know how to work with the system, and they end up finding out anyway. Um, it's also a game that you can install on a mobile device. So you can take this and run it on your phone, and it runs just fine. It also runs on VR devices like the Oculus Quest, using the Oculus browser that's part of that system, and it runs very well in the VR, in the virtual reality. So just want to reiterate that this environment can be whatever you make it. I won't be going back into videos on designing 3D, game art and things of that nature for quite a while. I'm going to put my attentions now to just the basic programming concepts and elements, concepts of computer science and computational thinking and so forth, and kind of back away from some of the art. But I can definitely talk with anybody that would like to about those details and making the environment whatever you would like it to be. So that being said, let's go take a look at how this box was created, how this was logged. This element tag name was logged to that little log area, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and just close out of this. And let's take a look at the code. Let's make it a little bit bigger so that we can see it better. Oh, a little too big. There we go. Okay, so what we have right here, now this is just changed as of yesterday, is I broke out the Python code into its own file so that we can have a true Python language syntax highlighting. So it's easy to see the different aspects of the language highlighted differently. We can see the semantics being used a lot better. And if we look at the top right here, we basically just have two import statements bringing in two different modules. So these are Python import statements. We're bringing in over here this window object from the browser module, and we're bringing in this, which is basically a function from the JavaScript module. So we're bringing those in. The window object is going to give us access to the window of the browser and objects that are contained in the window, as we'll see. And then this function is going to get called and used to refer to whatever this means in the context, as we'll see here in a little bit. So, and it's imported from the JavaScript module because this key term is a JavaScripty type of thing. And you'll see kind of what it means. It's a localized reference. Now let's go down to line 4 here. We see a basic function definition. And this function is defining an init function, which we will be using later to define our component. This init function is going to basically log using the window object that we imported. And then in the window object, there is a CS1 object. That's the CS1 game engine global object, which has a function called log, which is what writes to any type of log that you would add in the world. And you can have more than one of them. I just have that one log area in the world. but it's logging in, and it's logging this, and here we are using that this function. So what this is going to refer to is whichever entity has the component that we're going to be making. So we're going to be making what's going to be called a component, which adds behavior, and it can add also looks and behavior to a particular entity. Now, an entity is just a basic game object. It's what we call a basic game object. Just a generic game object is called an entity. And you can add components to the entities to give them additional behaviors and looks. Okay, so what I am doing right here is I'm referencing this, which will be some entity. And then the .el is the element, is the actual element, HTML element of that entity. And then the tag name is just whatever that HTML tag name is. And in the case of the code that we're dealing with a box. So a box is actually a type of custom element that is part of the A-frame library that is being used under the hood. Okay, and so we define this init function that logs the tag name for the particular element of the entity that is going to receive the component. Down below here we have a tick function, and the tick function is going to be again used in the definition of the component. And a tick function in the A-frame framework will receive, it's a type of update function, if you will. I shouldn't say that because components have a different update function. A tick component, a tick function is actually basically called in the game loop. So if you think about a game loop, all of the entities that have all of the components of all of the entities have their tick functions called in the main game loop that's under the hood. So it's done in a very efficient manner as to not waste any computation. So the first T stands for the total time that this particular component, which we'll be using it for defining a component, has been going for. And then the dt is the time since the last tick. So that's like the differential time or the delta time. And on line 8, we use that this function again to get access again to the HTML element. And then we're going to access this attribute called the object 3D, which gives us control over different properties of the 3D object. Now this is actually under the hood accessing the 3JS library object 3D, okay, which we can go down that rabbit hole if you want to contact me. But the object 3D has a position, and the position has X, Y, and Z components. Here we are varying the Y component of the position of the object 3D of that particular element by multiplying 2 times basically the sine of the total game time divided by 2000, and then we're adding 3 to that. So we're just wiggling it up and down, giving it a positive offset of 3 to make sure that it doesn't go under the ground. And those are the 2 function definitions we're going to be using when we define a component. We register a component down here. So down on line 10, again, we're using the window object that was imported from the browser module. And in the window object, we can access the global A-frame object, which is the A-frame global object used as part of the A-frame library, and it has a function, top-level function called register component, where you pass in the name of the component, and then you pass in uh, an object, if you will. In this case, we want to be passing in like a Python dictionary for the way that we're writing it. We're passing in basically a Python dictionary that's going to define these key value pairs associated with the component. Now, the init function that we've defined up here, that we refer to here, is basically going to get run one time whenever that component is initialized. The tick function, we can see referenced right here, that's defined up here, is going to run every game tick as the game loop goes through and ticks on and goes through and through and through. It's going to continue to call that tick function, okay, which is going to basically wiggle the Y position of whatever it is up and down based on the sine function, where it's getting fed the total time, which is going to keep getting larger and larger. So if we go down here to 12, we can see that we have a box variable getting declared and then assigned the value of a box element created using the window document create element function. And we proceed in the next three lines, 13, 14, and 15, to set some attributes on that box. We're going to first of all assign that box to have this component that we created. So we created this component PyFrame. So we're going to add that component basically by setting the attribute PyFrame. We don't have any special settings for this, but that's something we can look at in the future where we get into more detail about these components. For right now, we're just going to be setting the box to have the PyFrame component in this fashion. We're going to set the initial position for the box right here, setting the X, Y, and Z components for the initial position. And then the box, we're going to set its color to be maroon. And we're going to access the scene, which is basically the 3D scene. And we're going to add the box to the 3D scene in this manner. So that's the whole process. What can I do right now just to illustrate that we changed something? Well, I'll make it wiggle faster. So if I go over here, it should wiggle about twice as fast, right? So if I go over here and change this from 2000 to 1000, you can see up here in the top right, this little diskette kind of lit up, and that indicates a change was detected. So I can click Save by clicking that diskette. Maybe I'll make this smaller again because we're about to exit this area. Minimize it. So here's where we just came from. We just edited this and made it a 1000. Let's go see how that changed the box motion. So let's go ahead and launch that. And you should notice that the box is going
to CS1 Community Park.
Up and down faster.
Please join us at 9 p.m. for some tasty roasted marshmallow s'mores.
So there we have the basics of the a little bit more, I should say, involved with the Python integration. We truly can make a full blast game just interacting via Python with the game engine. You don't have to necessarily get into the JavaScript coding. I mean, you can approach it as a polyglot where you program it in Python as well as in JavaScript. But again, this is intended to offer you an opportunity to simply work in Python and create a game, or at least use it to create an interesting context for students to learn Python. All right, so that's pretty much all I have at this point. So please reach out. I can go into great depth about anything that you're interested in related to what I've built so far. If it's other tangential stuff, I'm sure I can find it out for you or point you to somebody else who will know better. I wish you a great day and take good care.